In this video, we're going to look at X and Y intercepts. When we're looking at a graph of a line, here a linear equation, we have what we call the X and the Y intercept. So remember that the vertical axis right here is the Y axis and the horizontal axis is the X axis. So this point right here where the graph crosses that X axis is called the X-intercept. And the point here where it crosses the Y-axis is the Y-intercept. And now remember, these are points, so we can write them as ordered pairs, which means an X-coordinate and a Y-coordinate. Well, if I'm looking at the X-intercept, I've moved over a certain distance here, but I haven't gone up or down. So every X-intercept is going to have the coordinates, whatever the X value is, comma 0. The Y-coordinate is always going to be 0 for an X-intercept. And then similarly for a Y-intercept, I haven't gone left or right from the origin, so my X-coordinate is always going to be 0, and then I'm going to have my Y-coordinate there. So it's important to remember that these are always ordered pairs, and we have to write them as ordered pairs. So sometimes we don't have a graph, but we still need to know the X and Y intercepts. And actually, because this equation is already in standard form, it would be easier to graph it by just finding the X and the Y intercepts first. So the way that we find the X and the Y intercepts, remember when we were talking about the X-intercept, we said the coordinate was X comma 0, which means that the Y value has to be 0. So to find the X-intercept, all I have to do is set the Y in the equation to 0. So 7x minus 6 times 0 equals 42. And so all of this here, this 6 times 0, is just going to become 0, so it doesn't affect the equation anymore. So really, I'm just looking at 7x equals 42. Divide both sides by 7, and x is equal to 6. So again, it's an ordered pair, and the coordinates are 6, 0. To find the Y-intercept, I would do something similar. Again, we have 0, comma y. So all I have to do now is replace x with 0. And again, just like in the last one, this whole thing just becomes 0. 7 times 0 is 0, so I'm really just left with negative 6y equals 42. Divide both sides by negative 6, and we end up with y equals negative 7. So as an ordered pair, that's 0, comma, negative 7. So here is my X-intercept, and here is my Y-intercept. They're two separate points, so we can't just combine those and write it as 6, negative 7. Don't do that, because that means it's just one point. They're two separate points, two separate ordered pairs. All right, let's look at another example. So again, for the X-intercept, I'll replace the Y with 0. So this basically just goes away, and I have 5x equals negative 15. Divide both sides by 5, and I get x equals negative 3. So the X-intercept is at negative 3, 0. For the Y-intercept, I will go ahead and replace x with 0. So I have 5 times 0 plus 7y. Oops, sorry, I'm trying to erase that. Equals negative 15. So that just becomes 0, so I'm left with 7y equals negative 15. Divide both sides by 7, and y is negative 15 sevenths. So you don't have to turn that into a decimal. You don't have to turn it into a mixed number. As long as it's a reduced fraction, you can just go ahead and leave that. And so our Y-intercept is at 0, comma, negative 15 sevenths. So those are our two answers, the X and the Y-intercept. Okay, one more example we'll look at. So again, we'll start with the X-intercept. which means we're going to replace the y with 0. And if you get confused about which one to replace with 0, remember that I'm finding the x-intercept, so I want the x to stay in the equation because I want to figure out what x is. So that means the y has to be the 0. It has to be the one I'm replacing. So again, this all just becomes 0, so I have 2x equals negative 15, which means x is equal to negative 15 halves. So my ordered pair is negative 15 halves, comma, 0. For the y-intercept, we'll replace the x with 0 because I want to find y, so it has to stay in the equation. So all of that becomes 0. I have negative 8y equals negative 15. Divide both sides by negative 8. And now here you have to remember that a negative divided by a negative makes this all positive 15/8. It doesn't reduce, so I can just leave it as 0, 15/8.